joining the show today, a guy that we've met multiple times in person. We've had wonderful conversations. I was kind of going through my list of potential guests and was kind of amazed that we hadn't asked you to be on before, and it's definitely a good time. I appreciate you fitting in during what is a busy time for the hottest team in basketball, and we will discuss that going forward here in a second. But first off, Johnny, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good, man. I appreciate it. It's always good running into you wherever that is. Typically, it's at a ballpark, but yeah, no, appreciate you having me on. And yeah, we're cooking right now, man. NBA season's been a trip.
It's been unreal, and we will spend a good chunk of time talking about that. But first off, I got to ask the question that I think all of America wants to know: what's Paul Rudd like in person?
It's so funny that you bring that up because we were just in Atlanta, and do you know Matt Weiner? He used to work at
Oh
ESPN.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So he does a lot with baseball. Now he's doing like the Atlanta Hawks pre and post
Yeah.
games. Anyway, I had known of him, obviously his work, but I had never met him. And so we were sitting next to each other listening to Quinn Snyder's pregame deal. And went to Mizzou and he's from St. Louis and I worked in Kansas City. And he brings up Paul Rudd. And so I'm like, that's wild. And then so I told him like my interaction with Paul Rudd the first time, which was, 2014, wild card, all that. And I said, honestly, Paul Rudd's part of the reason that I ended up in Detroit because of the interview that we did that, quote unquote, went viral. And so we were just having this big laugh about Paul Rudd. And now it's just funny that that's one of the first things we talk about on the show. Paul Rudd brings people together, you know?
He does, man. Yeah, I was having a conversation with my mom. I mean, she was she finds movies on Netflix specifically that have Paul Rudd in them for just he's America's sweetheart. So no, I appreciate it,
Yes.
and I actually did want to start with that because that was your first year in Detroit was 15, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, yeah. So you were there in I guess I should probably recap for people who might not know. You were in Kansas City at the time in 2014 when they made their run to the World Series. Obviously, they went back and won it in 15, but that was not just the first time they'd been to the World Series in 29 years. That was the first time since 1985 they'd been to the playoffs. So it was
Yeah.
uncharted territory. It was really kind of an incredible run, a team that got crazy hot in the second half. Just what's the coolest part of being involved in a championship chase like that, especially one that takes place in a city that hadn't seen a ton of success with their baseball team in a few decades?
Well, to be honest with you, man, you're good on your remembrance of that time because like all of us, when you start out in the profession, you don't know if you're ever going to get an opportunity to cover a champion
Right.
in any sport. And so, I was blessed. I know a lot of people use that word a lot, but I really felt blessed for my time when I was working in Topeka, Kansas, and then Kansas City that I covered Kansas basketball, won the national championship in '08. That was kind of like the pinnacle of everything at that point. And the Royals were an afterthought, to be honest with you. I worked in local TV for 12 years and, you'd run like a Royals highlight maybe, in those like mid 2000s. And then they got hot when that collection of young talent kind of came together with, like Hosmer, Moustakas, and, Lorenzo Kane. And obviously they had the pitching. So when they made that run, I remember, obviously 2014, to your point. So like the Tigers won it all in '84, the Royals won it all in '85. And then from that point forward, the Royals didn't do anything. So when they went on that run in 2014 and into the wild card, to watch that city come alive, and I had lived there at that time. So I was in Topeka for 5.5 years covering the Royals, as a local guy, and then into Kansas City for 3.5. So, I'd covered the team for 9 years, parts of 9 seasons. So when they went on that run, it really, you felt it, like you felt it. And if you ever spend any time in Kansas City, it really is a proud sports town. And when they went on that run, I mean, they swept their way into the World Series
Yeah.
against Madison Bumgarner and the Giants. And it was and if you remember, I know you remember, but the Tigers were eliminated by Baltimore, and nobody really saw that coming. So the fact that and Kansas City didn't play Detroit all that well at all during the regular season. So once the Tigers were eliminated, then you started to think about what's possible, and they went on and swept the Orioles, and then of course lost in 7 games to the Giants. But it was incredible because it was a precursor to kind of what we're experiencing now here in
Yeah.
Detroit again. But it felt I didn't know at that time that I would ever come close to covering a world champion again. The fact that you got to 7 games, game time run on third base,
Yeah.
and I thought, and then they didn't, and it didn't happen. And then I left the next season to come to Detroit. Royals go on and win it all in 5 games in 2015 over the Mets,
Yeah.
as I'm watching from afar. And now we're trying to get back there with Detroit. But the journey is always beautiful, no matter what market you work in, what
Yeah.
teams you cover. It was a special time for that city at that time, no question.
Yeah, and it was a unique thing, and it's this is the I guess this is the downside of knowing so much about baseball in the sense that I remember what rival teams do because I
Mm.
remember that season that was a pennant chase till the very end. Tigers won that division the last day of the season. That was the David Price against the Twins, and at that moment we were thinking to ourselves, all right, well that's it for the Royals. They're on the other side of the bracket. We don't have
Yeah.
to worry about this. Just get through Baltimore. And then it really was, and I guess that'll be a great trivia question one day. Is the only team that Mike Trout ever played a playoff series against was that Angels team in the ALDS,
Yeah.
which were great that year. They won 95, 96 games, and yeah, they won their first. They won the wild card game, which is insane. That comeback against
Greatest
Oakland,
game
and
I ever saw. Yeah. Greatest
was
game I ever saw in person.
easily one of the best. I'm in the minority here. I think I missed the one game wild card. I liked it, and I'm not even acknowledging the. It's probably not fair because you play 162 and it's going to come down to one. But like
Yeah.
a game like that kind of proved why I liked it. But moving on, man. Obviously, we started with the Kansas City stuff. But let's talk about the Pistons for a bit. Yeah. So look, obviously, man. I mean, this is the story of the NBA season right now. I mean, the Pistons red hot, and it's this is one of those moments where I feel old because when they talk about best start in 20 years, and I specifically remember the
Yeah.
season, the 64 win season where they had 4 All Stars back in '06.
Yeah.
Look, obviously, incredible story, and I like having these discussions with somebody who's on the inside because you watch as a fan and you kind of think to yourself, well, I guess they just got better players, I guess they just got better coach, what have you. As someone who's been in it a little bit more, what's the biggest change that you've seen that's kind of allowed for them to blossom over the last year and a half?
Well, I mean, honestly, I was asked this yesterday actually, and I've always felt this way. And you've been around sports obviously your entire life too. And it doesn't matter the sport necessarily. When a new coach or new GM or front office or whatever, when somebody takes over and they say, hey, we want to establish a culture, right?
Yeah.
And as fans, it's like, is the culture, does that include winning?
Right.
Because that's like that's kind of what we're about. And so, you hear that all the time when people come in, they want to establish a culture. Well, when you have an organization like the Detroit Pistons, it's easy to lean back on, if we go back to, like obviously the Bad Boys era, that was a point in time that I think, as with the benefit of hindsight for everybody, it's always like, man, those were the days. But they had a blueprint of what style worked, right? Of what the brand of what Detroit basketball should be about. That's not to say that like obviously the Lions embody that same type of grit, the gritty Tigs, a couple of years ago, where it's like that whole idea of being, blue collar, yeah. But the Pistons kind of implemented like that can be the style. And so even before the current front office, that was what people were trying to get back to. Like, can we get guys that have that type of DNA, right? When we're drafting certain players, like the Isaiah Stewarts, the Ron Hollins, the Sar Thompson, guys that kind of fit that mold. But when JB Bickerstaff took over, you remember last year, it was like he has a personality. And I had known him a little bit, obviously, with what he had done in Cleveland. You always have great respect for it. And you're always hopeful when a guy comes over and you say, okay, we're going to establish, what quote unquote Detroit basketball is all about. But he made it very clear. This is what it's going to look like. This is what it's going to be about. And then there has been collective buy-in. And so honestly, it's the most that I've seen an actual team all the way up and down the roster take on the identity of the coach. As a coach, you don't necessarily want to just be liked, you want to be respected. But can you be liked and respected? And that's what's happened. So is he a player's coach? I wouldn't say that. I mean, meaning like where he's, not a disciplinarian or anything like that. No, I think these guys want to be coached hard. They believe in what he's done. And he was able to come in and get the most out of these guys. So a guy like Cade who takes 2 steps forward and then the rest of the young nucleus able to take a step forward when healthy, it's kind of been that perfect blend of, okay, here's the messaging, here's the identity, and can we all take steps forward? That doesn't always happen, as you know. Guys don't always just get better because they've had another year under their belt, but that's what we've seen. And now it's obviously they're off to, an incredible start. Uncharted territory for this particular group.
For sure. And I think that when you bring up culture, and it's something I use all the time, especially when talking about the Tigers and the fact that, like, a great organization is one, it's a moving machine. Like it's not just one guy establishing something. I think that a coach or manager can do all they can to establish a culture. But if the GM isn't providing them with good players, like, it's just kind of not going to go anywhere. And I think that, as we've seen now with really all the teams in this city, you have coaches or managers who've done a great job of establishing culture, establishing identity, while you also have guys at the top who are making smart decisions and providing them with good players. And you mentioned the young nucleus because I feel like, especially with the Tigers, for the last decade, I've talked about, the idea of player development. And I feel like it's something that is discussed in baseball more than any other sport because there is a minor league system and guys kind of got to work their way up. But watching the Pistons this year, even beyond Cade, who's obviously blossomed as he did a year ago, I feel like the young talent that you mentioned just looks more comfortable in their respective roles. And I think that speaks to the idea of player development. And that's something that, even going back to the going to work Pistons, those guys weren't drafted. Chauncey was not a guy they drafted. Those were guys that I think it's I could, assuming that, recent champions have a Hall of Famer, which they will. I want to say the '04 Pistons are the only team since like 1980 that didn't draft a Hall of Famer. Like that was a very rare in how their roster was constructed. So what is it about this regime that you think has allowed for their player development to blossom, whereas maybe other regimes weren't as successful?
Well, one thing is, I think there was so if you go back to JB's time when he was like in Cleveland, when he played with like a larger lineup, when the whole league had fallen in love with, like, it's all perimeter shooting, right? So it very much is a copycat league.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not saying, all 30 teams did it, but basically everybody's like, okay, here's where the emphasis is going to be. This is how the new modern game is going to play. And then Cleveland was a matchup problem for everybody because they had so many bigs and the way they played. And obviously you had, really talented backcourt and Mitchell and Garland too. But it was like he kind of like bucked the trend. It was like, well, what do I have? Like, what do I have with me and how do I accentuate that? As opposed to, okay, here's the model of how the league's being played. Now we've got to try to tailor it to that. It's like in any sport, if a coach came in and he said, okay, I like to run the air raid offense, and you have a quarterback who, you know what I mean, is I cannot do that. And you're like, yeah, but this is what we do. And you're like, well, it's not going to be successful. So I think what has allowed this team was, okay, and look at the way they play this year. Like, they play a ton of inside out, and they say, okay, we're not necessarily just going to make guys prolific perimeter shooters if that's not their game. Like, what's wrong with the mid-range game? Nothing. The league had gotten away from it. A lot of analytics driven. It's like, hey, 3 for 2 is better than 2 for 2.
Yeah.
So I just feel like when you got the buy-in and you have the pieces in place, and so it's been that the right collection and not necessarily always being attracted to, well, what about this guy who has these numbers elsewhere that might become available? And you say, but I believe this guy, if we do actually work with him, can be that, like, can fit into this system better. It's like you're not jamming a puzzle piece together by just going out and getting production elsewhere. So, that's the way I see it.
No, and I think you're right, and I think that understanding the role of each player on your team and understanding your roster construction is so important across all levels of basketball. And I think that it's a mistake that I've seen college coaches fall into, which is this idea of we just need to recruit the best players. It's like, well, okay, there's an element to that, but you got to make sure that these players fit best together. If you're making up a team of just stretch fours, it's not going to work. You're not going to have good guard play. You might be good in one area here or there, but I think that having that balance is very important. And you mentioned the analytics part of things, which is it's strange because, again, I go back to baseball, which I'm not saying sports analytics began in baseball necessarily, but I feel like over the last decade we've seen football and basketball start to adopt more advanced statistics. Not even going to say to mixed results, but just kind of to an interesting discourse. What are your kind of thoughts on that? Because I'm very much like a basketball purist in the sense, and you just mentioned it, like, dude, if you got a good 18-footer, like, take it. I don't
Right.
need you taking a few more steps back and
Right.
like jacking it from 30 feet. Like I want open baskets, and I feel like in this age where you have the Victor Wembanyamanas of the world who are 7 feet, yet they can bring the ball up court. That the game has evolved to this point where perimeter shooting is so much more valuable. How do you, just personally, as somebody who takes in the game, kind of view that stuff? Do you think that it's become a little bit like information overload, or do you think it's just kind of the way of the future?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like it's balance on. I mean, it's balance on anything. Where I can't remember when I used to practice. When I'd practice, I'd love playing basketball growing up. Like that was kind of like my thing. Clearly, no college coaches thought that was my thing, but I thought it was. And so, anyway, I'd constantly be shooting corner threes like all day in
Mhm.
at my house, and my dad would say, "Get inside, shoot a higher percentage shot," and I'd say, "Pop, if I keep practicing out here." Right from 19.9, it'll become a higher percentage shot, right?
Yeah.
So I just feel like the way the sport is tailored, or in all sports, everybody's looking for, okay, is there some type of cheat code, or I don't want to say cheat code, but is there another, like, can I peel back a layer to see, let me just look at base numbers on what could work and what could give you a competitive edge. At the end of the day, when you watch a team play, like a true team, um, I'll bring up Atlanta just because we just played them the other day.
Yeah.
Now that Trey Young's, he's got an MCL injury, so he's been out of the rotation. When you watch this team play without having a ball dominant guard, it's no knock on Trey because, like, he'll be one of the top scoring leaders in the league every year. And then you say, but are they perhaps better without him because of the style in which they play? Because the ball is distributed a little bit more, guys are getting more touches. So it doesn't all equate the same. Like I know it sounds funny, but if people say, like if like you'll hear this sometimes. Well, if he goes for like if Trey goes for 40, we might have a chance to win,
Yeah.
right? But if he goes for 25, we're in trouble, right? And then
Mhm.
people at home be like, how does that make any sense? But when you watch the essence of a team game, I think that's like what it rolls back to, and I understand like the analytic numbers. I think the game will go back to being, I don't know if it'll go back to being, but everything in sports is cyclical. I just
Yeah.
feel like the best teams will rise. Obviously, Oklahoma City, they have obviously a dominant player in SGA, but it's not just SGA. And that's what I feel like with Detroit. As great as Cade is, and we'll just use Detroit since they're top of the Eastern Conference right now, it's not Cade or bust. It is truly a team essence. And so they allow Cade to flourish in the mid range. Jalen Duren he's more of a throwback big because 90% of his production comes right inside the paint. Like he doesn't have to step out to 18 feet yet, right? And so I just feel like when you watch them play, it looks like the ball's on a string and it's just team basketball. It's organized, it's on a string, and they execute the offense. So, how many possessions you get in a game, if you can maximize those offensive possessions, maybe you don't need 10 extra possessions by shooting early in the clock and just shooting threes the entire night. So, I
Yeah.
don't know. It's been fun for me to watch. I mean, I think just as a fan, it's been a fun brand of basketball, and I feel like it's just been working.
For sure. It's ironic to me that you brought up Trey Young, because I feel like that's a player. And I'm not even trying to throw shade at the guy, but I feel like that's a player that analytics haven't been necessarily kind to, because I think that analytics greatly favor efficiency numbers and have kind of been down on this idea of volume scorers and
Yeah,
guys who are going to rack up a bunch of points but maybe shoot the ball a ton. Where I go back and forth with that, because like if a team only has one really great player, I want that guy to have the ball in his hands. It's
sure.
like the coach's son in CY in the Catholic Youth League is like, I don't care if you're taking 50 shots, like don't pass
Exactly.
it. But
Exactly.
I do think that the game over the last decade has kind of evolved in that sense of understanding that there is a downside to having low efficiency, high scoring players, and I think that analytics have kind of allowed that to shine through. Now, it was several years back. You started occasionally filling in on play by play for obviously the great George Blaha, who there's a few staples in Michigan that I don't, since I've been alive, I don't know anything else. I don't know any other Michigan State basketball coach. I've only ever known Tom Izzo, and I've only ever known George Blaha as the voice of the Pistons. Like, so, I would, at least if I was in your shoes, and this is going to be my question, somewhat daunting, even in a part-time basis. The idea of like, hey, you're filling in for a guy that the whole universe knows as being associated with the voice of the Pistons. Did you feel that sense of pressure filling in, or do you try to block out that noise and just take it on as, okay, this is like a player, and just take it on as, hey, it's just another
Yeah,
game, just another opportunity?
that's a great question, man. And honestly, I think because I have the as much as I can say this, like George and I are like buddies. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like because we're around each other all the time. And, it's my 12th season, so I've been with him, for for 12 years. So we sit next to each other on the plane. We go to lunch together. We go to dinner together. And he has become, I know this sometimes gets overused, like a father figure, like, I mean, obviously, but because there is a little bit of an age gap between us, slightly. But the thing is, it's like when we spend time together, it's like, that's my guy. Right.
Yeah.
So I guess if I was kind of on the outside and coming in and somebody said, hey, you're better off replacing the guy who replaced the guy as opposed
Yeah.
to like just sliding into those shoes,
Famous
you know,
adage. Yeah.
yeah, right. And so
Yeah.
I always felt like I always knew, I would pop in, I'd keep the chair warm, and George would be right back. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it never was like overly daunting. However, I did know that for the vast majority, like my first, so 2015, that 2014-15 season was my first. George never took time off, um, obviously, except for Michigan State football on Saturday. So there's a very small number of games that you'd even get an opportunity. And I don't think I started calling games till 2019, not age 19. But anyway, so then once you start and get a little bit more work, and he would come, and he would say, hey, and offer a couple suggestions. So it always felt natural, as though like, hey, I'll make you proud, and then you get back to work. And now you get a few more games to do it, and now there's a trust where, like, I'm doing the game Saturday in Milwaukee because he's got the Michigan State last game, where we just, he'll just say, hey, Marion, I thought you did a great job, and it's like, hey, man, I really appreciate it. So there has been an appreciation, and never a thought of like, hey, I'm gunning for you,
Yeah.
or anything like that, or like, hey, man, kid, don't screw it up. You know what I mean? Like, whatever you do, it was always just, it always felt like I always felt encouraged, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think that having an established sense of community helps with that so much. I mean, it would be probably very isolating if you just slid in without any kind of prior knowledge of the
Right.
situation, or even like prior knowledge of him as a human being. I think that it was designed in a way for it to seamless probably is the right word, but just to be as comfortable as it could be considering the
Sure.
circumstances. And one thing that I've always really loved about Detroit fans and really the whole city is that like we have a really great respect for our broadcasters and our like the history of our broadcasters here. And I think that that's one of the things, and I would love to ask him this sometime, if that was something that was appealing to Benetti when he kind of came over from Chicago, is this idea of like, I mean, there's an Arnie
Yeah.
Harwell statue outside of Comerica
Yeah.
Park. Like we take this stuff, very seriously, and I find it. There's kind of a dynasty of broadcasters that we've created. And so, just from your perspective, whether as a reporter or somebody who's done play-by-play, what's the one thing that you've learned being in Detroit that you feel like you couldn't learn anywhere else?
Look at you, man. You're just firing out some real good gems
I
today,
I
man.
I,
I
I
mean,
do my research, man. We
no,
try I try to ask you stuff you've never been asked. So I appreciate that, man.
no, it's really good. It's thoughtful. Yeah, honestly, what I remember I grew up 100 miles from Detroit, and so when the job was first came open, they said, how would you feel about Detroit? And it was an easy one for me because I knew, I grew up, close enough to the area where I actually did watch, the Bad Boys, and obviously I knew the Tigers. I mean, I was only 4 when the Tigers won it in '84, but the point was I knew about the tradition of the city. Ernie Harwell, somebody I listened to when I was in high school, delivering pizzas, and in my opinion, is the greatest voice of all.
I would agree.
Um, and actually, I just did a show last night, and we were talking about Bob Ufer. 36 years at University of Michigan. We were playing back like the '79 Michigan Indiana game, and
When he's biting around the horn. Yeah.
it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
But so I just felt like coming into this culture, like being a part of this city. My mom's one of my favorite people in the whole, probably my favorite person in the whole world. and she always would say, like, regardless of the teams necessarily, she would say, "Isn't it so great that you're in Detroit?"
Yeah.
Like she just loves Detroit, right? But so we're from Northwest Ohio, but she has like this appreciation for like what Detroit represents. And I always said, yeah, because I've always moved around a bunch for work. And so when I got to Detroit, she's like, "Isn't it great that you're in Detroit?" Like that was like the pinnacle. And I was
Mhm.
like, yeah. And the more that I've been here, it's like, yeah, because it means something. To your point, it means like it truly means something. So, and it's not to say it doesn't in other cities, but to understand like what what this is about, like what it means to people. I know how much it means to you, obviously.
Yeah.
um whether there's like whether there's anything else attached to it other than your own emotion that comes with being a Detroit sports fan, like it matters. And so any opportunity you get to come here and cover these sports teams. And obviously, I primarily am only doing the NBA and Major League Baseball now. But there was a point in time where I was doing some Lions and Wings. Like you get like goosebumps walking into arenas. You never get jaded by the industry or any of it. It was like it matters, and it matters a lot to me. Um, so it's just been incredible, man. It's honestly, it is a dream. It doesn't matter necessarily like any, as you know, it's like it doesn't matter necessarily like if somebody said, "Are you making a good living?" And it's like, well, how do you define that? In my mind, every opportunity to go to like a Tigers game or a
Yeah.
Piston, and I mean this with all sincerity, it's like, this is unbelievable to me. And if I was 11 years old and somebody said, "Hey, you're going to do it for 50 cents an hour," I'm like, lock it in.
Yeah.
You know
And
what I
it's
mean?
oh dude, totally. And I remember having that vibe when Detroit went on their crazy, I call it second half, but it was really last month and a half of the season surge in 24 when they went from a team, 0.2% chance to all of a
Mhm.
sudden they're in the postseason. My producer and I were going to Comerica, whether it was for watch parties, and we were spending some money to stay downtown, and it
Yeah.
was not in terms of financially probably a lucrative thing, but
Right.
both of us came back saying like this is some of the most fun I've ever had doing anything, just because like there is a connection that's made. And I think it's a very Midwest thing. I always make this joke, but if you really want to know how important sports are to people around here, work at a gas station, which I did for 2 years, because you can tell the difference following like a big Lions win, a big Tigers series win, a big Michigan State victory, in terms of how people conduct themselves when they're asking for their coffee and cigarettes versus when that team is going through when that team is going through a rough stretch.
Yeah.
Like you can feel it, like it impacts the community. And I think that like communal experience has made it, it's made it more fun, obviously, I'm sure, for you guys, but also for people like me. And you've done so much with one of the things I think is kind of a theme on this show is just like the idea of seeing guys at their peak. And I feel like over the last several years, we've been really fortunate in Detroit here, whether it's some of the guys in with the Lions, but specifically with what you do. I mean, I think Cade, I don't think he's reached his peak yet, which is scary. Like, I think
Mhm.
that there's still like a better version of him that's going to be unleashed as he gets older. But the guy behind me, obviously, that's Tarek, multi-time Cy Young winner now. And it's weird. And this is where like I like to think I've grown up, and I am technically older than Tarek, but like we've had him on the show twice, and I like have to fight the urge not to do like Garth from Wayne's World and just like kind of fall on his dude, thank you so much, man. Like I just
Yeah.
I adore the guy, and so but it's you've been on the inside, and every person that I've heard talk about Tarek has said kind of the same thing, which is that his game has evolved. He's grown as a pitcher, but as a guy, he hasn't really changed. His mindset as a human being and in terms of how he goes about his business is very similar. As someone who's covered a lot of athletes, how difficult is that for somebody who gets all these accolades, who achieves all these, he is as good at what he does as anybody in the world, and yet kind of is able to keep that level head. How difficult is that from your perspective as someone who's watched guys kind of change and grow, whether it's financially or in terms of their personal success? How tough is that?
Let me just say, your line of questioning, you got a solid future ahead.
Thank you. Thank you.
You already have a good book of work, but it's a great point. It's a great point. And honestly, and I think what we all need to keep in mind, be cognizant of is, so I'm older than Tarek too, and I think I'm older than you. I know I am. But
Yeah.
what would we have done at that age in our lives as young men, with the accolades, with the money, with the attention, and with basically, carte blanche, whatever you want.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would have handled it well. I really don't think I would have. I don't think that I would like to believe that I wouldn't have like changed too much.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so when you mentioned Tarek and you also had mentioned Kate, and I'm just because I am around these guys, I
Yeah.
see the parallels in both of them. So whether we'll see what happens with Tarek, obviously from a contractual standpoint, but
Yeah.
like Cade secured his bag,
Hmm.
but he's no different. You know what I'm saying? Like when you talk to his mom and dad or his brother, like he's still Cade, like he's Cade Cunningham. But
Yeah.
now all of a sudden he's a superstar and likely another All Star and could be in an MVP discussion very soon. Tarek wins back to back size, has put himself in a position to obviously take care of generations of Scoobles down the line. But it doesn't change the man within. It's
Yeah.
very difficult to like comprehend that, and I would like to think we're all been brought up the right way. Like I would hope that I wouldn't have changed too much. I mean, nobody cares how I would have handled it, but same with you, Chris. It's like, how would you be different? And so when you get to see these guys and actually be around them, like to your point, it's like you could bow and be like, hey man, you're great, we love everything you've
Yeah.
done, you provided so much happiness in my life. And then for that individual to say thank you but not change
Yeah.
is I would think pretty doggone rare.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Pistons and the Tigers each have those guys as kind of the franchise pieces of this humility and still decent guys, like that's everything. So, if I did have children of my own and they said, hey, I'd like, I want to get a jersey or whatever, I know the first two that I would
Yeah.
be going to shop for because I would feel good enough about these are the guys that you want to be, beholden to.
100%. And it's one of those things where like and look, there's documented evidence of like how I've handled certain things. So it's like I have great respect for guys like that. I mean, it's like I get a video that does over 50,000 views, and I think I'm hot shit. It's like the idea of I'm throwing 103-mile-per-hour fastballs to end games. It's like this is really a remarkable thing, and it's as you get older, the more you realize how young an athlete in their prime really is. Like Cade Cunningham is just barely past college age,
Yeah,
right? Like most people are,
24.
yeah, most people are in like going through grad school at this point and are not in any situation where they're in the public eye. And I think that this is where social media has obviously made life so much more difficult for a lot of people. Is that the microscope is held up to people so much closer than it ever was, and I think that we have it's only going to get worse. But I think back, like when I was one of my earliest memories in sports was the emergence of this. You've probably heard of him. This kid from Akron named LeBron James, and who was on the cover of Sports Illustrated at like 17, and just with the caption of the chosen one. And the idea of like this was kind of pre-social media and before we knew what that monster could be. And the older I get, the more respect I have for athletes who like just find ways to stay out of trouble. Like the worst, unless there's something I'm missing, the worst thing that LeBron's done is he decided to live in Miami instead of
Yeah.
Cleveland. Which, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, like what a piece of garbage. Like, and
Yeah.
no disrespect to my Cleveland people, but like if that's your like the worst thing you've done, I think that you're in a good place. So no, it's been fun to watch, and I think that just as a whole, look, winning solves everything. But I find the current batch of Detroit athletes and coaches to be very likable, and
Yeah.
I'm not on the inside as much as some other people are, but I just think that like when you have a collection of younger players, I think it's easier to reel them in. Often it's kind of before the money, and even if it is after the money, they still feel like it's very much a part of the city, of the culture here. Do you feel like do you kind of share those sentiments that it's been
Yeah.
maybe a little bit, it's easier to cover teams that have kind of younger players that are still kind of coming up through the system?
Yeah, I think so 100%, man. I to be like my first year was doing Tigers was 15 and I just remember it was an intimidating clubhouse for a freshman reporter
Yeah.
because right, it was, the David Price and the Verlander and
Verlander.
Vmart and Miggy and Jose Iglesias and it was like Ian Kinsler was a tough interview for me early on, you know what I mean? Because he didn't give you any freebies.
Yeah.
But these guys were like, these were like seasoned vets, and I come in all slick hair. They're like, "Who's this dude?" Had to earn it. And then
Yeah.
when you have a younger, like I said this the other day, the coolest thing for me to think about, which also says I'm getting older too, just like you, is that I have been fortunate to be uh, the entire Pistons roster, everybody on that team. I've been there from the first time they walked in the office,
Yeah.
and the same with the Tigers. Because you go 12 seasons in, it's like Jay Raj is like the longest tenured. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
so you're like, okay, well I've been there from day one. I can remember when he was a snot nosed rookie. You know what I mean? So it's kind of cool when you can come up with them or watch their
100%.
evolution. It like I love that, honestly. I That's the best word I can come up with. I love that, like just watching the growth. And I think like what we saw like the other day, you saw like with Naylor signed extended with like Seattle.
Yeah.
And he said, you could have maximized perhaps elsewhere from a zero standpoint, but I love being here. My family loves it here. And I feel like most of that was genuine what he said, if not all of it. And I do feel like obviously like with Glaber Torres coming back here, there is a belief in like, do you like where you are? Like, do you
Yeah.
like you and I both know this, I think, is somebody could say to you, and I don't mean to get off track, but it's like somebody
Okay.
could say to you, like, Chris, okay, here's $1 million, but I'm gonna plant you over here and start over. And you're like, hey, I love the challenge for sure. Or
Yeah.
somebody says, hey, I'm gonna give you, 3/4 of that, but you're going to be insulated with that environment that you already appreciate, your routine set, blah blah blah, and your support systems right there. At the end of the day, as human beings, what are we chasing? Like what makes you complete as a human? Is it the capacity to spend more, have more, or is it the capacity to operate at your full potential because you feel so good about your surroundings? And I think in sports, there's always that allure of chasing a check, where sometimes you see guys leave or take other opportunities elsewhere. And I never faulted anybody for doing that. But I feel like when you have a younger group, like to get back to our point of like when you see these young guys develop, I think to a man, if you said, I believe in the organizational direction and I believe in the support system around me, not just with my family, but my baseball family or my basketball family,
Yeah.
like I think that's what's fun. And that's what's fun to be a part of when you watch a collection grow together as opposed to we're cherry picking this guy,
Yeah.
this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and you're like, here's your team,
Hmm.
and you're like, oh yeah, yeah, okay,
And I'm definitely getting off topic now, but that is one of the things that I lament about the current state of college sports, quite frankly, which is
for
that,
sure.
and I saw Izzo had a quote the other day after the Kentucky win of like, I want to develop guys. I want guys who buy into the program. I want guys who buy into my team. And it's so weird that that is now old fashioned because
I
for
know.
most of my life, that's what college basketball was. It was, I mean, I grew up, obviously, you got Trey Burke behind me here, but in the Beeline era where he would take on these scrawny projects that nobody had heard of, and then all of a sudden they were all Big Ten guys playing in, several years later. But nowadays they would have transferred out after their first year. And I feel like that familiarity that you get in professional sports where you see guys come up through the system and grow. I mean, I remember watching Tarek's minor league starts. A lot of the fun, I kind of lament that a lot of the fun of that it exists, but it exists in a much different form currently in college sports, where you have guys who will be legit pieces of your program who then leave, guys that you hadn't heard of who then are playing 1 year. It's the future. Like, I'm not going to knock teams for going, spending money the way that they need to and building good rosters, but it's something that I do like kind of miss. Especially like you feel like you
Oh
kind of get to watch these guys grow up a bit. And it's not as intimate. I feel like in that
yeah,
sense.
no, and I love college athletics. Like I
Yeah,
love
me too.
college sports, and I know you. It's like that's the thing. Isn't it funny how, like you said, now this old school approach from Tom, but maybe it takes that. Like it takes
Yeah,
a high profile coach to buck the trend. I thought it was a brilliant quote that he had the other night, right? Where he said, not at Michigan State. I want to develop my guys. I want to see what I have.
yeah,
He said winning the transfer portal is almost as important as winning games. Not here, not in East Lansing. I was like, oh boy, Tom.
yeah,
But it's like, but maybe that's what it takes. And then somebody else is like, yeah, what the heck are we doing? And again, there's always overcorrections. When something first comes in, it was like the Wild West there for a minute. Remember when Calipari, when they first had the one and done thing in Kentucky, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, he's ruining the game. And now it's like,
yeah.
well, that seems very minor as compared to what we're dealing with now, where it's like one and
Hmm.
done, one and done, one and done, four times over. But maybe Izzo, if, we'll see where it goes from here. But if he's able to, develop again and see some 3 and 4 year players come through the system and they're making it to another Final Four, and everybody says, "Hey, let's go back to doing what Tom did, where he
Yeah.
develops." You never know.
And it's so funny to bring it back to kind of a local connection here. I mean, yeah, Calipari he had the team in 2012 that won it all with Anthony Davis as a freshman, multiple kind of one and done
All right,
guys. And then they
beat
had
Kansas at you.
yeah, and then in 2015, obviously the undefeated team that lost to in the Final Four, but still a very successful group. But then you look at the back end of his time at Kentucky, and it ultimately ended with Greg Kampe knocking him out in that game. And I remember after that game, Jay Wright, who was the analyst in the studio at the time, brought up the fact that like, look, of course there's more NBA talent on this Kentucky team. It's Kentucky. But I'm telling you, these guys in Oakland have been playing together with each other for 3, 4, 5 years even. And, because that was at the time where we were including the COVID year. So it's like, I do
Yep.
think synergy and stuff like team chemistry, which we talk about as kind of these abstract things, they very much matter in sports. And I think over time, because like you said, yeah, Wild West. And over one of these days, there's going to be some sort of sanctioning where you can't just be like the Dodgers of college sports and just spend as much money. But for the time being,
Yeah,
things are
it
things are
is.
wide open. Uh,
Yeah.
a few more for you here, man. And I don't want to self gloss necessarily, but I've honestly always been curious about this question because you've always been very good to me, and the people at FanDuel have always been very cool. But what's in general the media's viewpoint of the independent creator, such as like myself or my producer? Just because when I started doing this, and I was in college, so I mean, we don't need to dig up those videos, but it's like when I started doing this, I kind of felt like the kid in the back of the class that was like hurling spitballs at the teacher. And then I like to think, I've grown. I dress better now at least, so it's like that's a start. But I'm just curious because you like look, graduate of Ohio U, like you've come up through your system, you've I'm sure you've done internships, and now you find yourself with the Pistons. How do you view kind of the independent creators? Do you almost view it, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is it not a lesser a lesser thing
No.
necessarily, but does it get frustrating sometimes when you have people who've worked so hard to get to a certain place, and yet you see somebody who pops off for a video here or there? Is it, and doesn't maybe feel like it is not an earned thing, or do you not really look
No.
at it?
Yeah, that's another freaking great question, because the reality is, so I work with this other program called sportscaster.com,
Yeah,
and it's about all these, like, it's like younger aspiring broadcasters.
yeah,
So, and if you say the traditional sense of, well, you got to start in a small market, or you need to get an internship while you're in school, get involved in school, and then, start in a small market, work your way up. And it's like, no, everybody's path is so unique.
yeah,
And just because you don't have call letters attached to your name, or you're not employed by blank, blank, blank TV or whatever it is, or radio, it's like, do you know what you're doing? And so I remember when I was in school, and I was going to continue my education a little bit longer. And a guy said to me, who was in the business, he said, "Don't do it." He said, "It does not matter if you've got your master's, your doctorate, or whatever." He said, "You need to get out there and do it. Like, do you know what you're talking about? Do you know what you're doing? Do you love sports?" It's like, well, yeah. So you don't need a certificate to show that. And what I feel like, because of, like, social media obviously can be a very dark place. I'm not telling you anything you don't know.
yeah,
Um, so,
yeah,
so, uh, but it has created these avenues for quote unquote content creators.
yeah,
Are you any less valuable? Like, think about your following, even of, like, people, like, say, I got to hear what Chris has to think about it. Like, that matters, even if it was 2 people, and it's
yeah,
way more than two, where it's like, I want to hear what Chris thinks about it, because there's a belief in that you are so plugged in and care enough and have the knowledge, where another human being says, I want to get his take on it. When I actually first heard about you, I don't know if I ever told you this. When I first saw your first clip, who showed me the clip was Mario and Pemba.
oh really, oh
It
wow,
was
that's very, very humbling, yeah,
Yeah, and I remember. So I saw the clip. Obviously, it was, it was like, I don't remember exactly what was said, but it was like, I could tell like it came from a place of passion. And I was
yeah,
like,
yeah,
this guy's. I was like, okay. And that, anyway, that's when I started when I learned your name for the first time. So
thank you.
when I see people like you, I know, man, I know how tough it is.
Hmm.
I have an understanding of how hard it is to, like, break through.
Hmm.
So Does it mean because you didn't graduate from, let's say, like Newhouse School at Syracuse, that you're any less informed or less articulate in your takes on what an organization could, should, might do? No. It's just a matter of like, what is your reach, and how does that gain? And, again, how do you measure success? Does that mean you have to have a certain amount of followers or views, whatever? All that matters is like, if it's coming from a place, and if you're saying every day, like the commitment for you to do 162 game recaps, it's like,
Yeah.
hello, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
I
That
appreciate it. I really respect it, to be honest,
Well,
100%.
that means a lot, and it's interesting, at least on my end, because I ran into a guy at the gym a few weeks ago, who was a high school student who was on the treadmill, and he goes, "Hey, can I just talk to you for a few minutes?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." And it's tough because I don't want to tell people to go the route that I've gone necessarily and be like, no, it's totally a good idea to leave college.
Yeah.
It's totally a good idea to just hope Spencer Turnbull throws a no hitter and it happens to cross Dave Portnoy's desk. Like, I don't. This guy asked, like, I think I'm a pretty good student. Should I go to school? I'm like, dude, absolutely. Like, go get your thing. And that's not to say that, like, he can't pivot at some other point, but
Sure.
just on my end, it does become kind of difficult sometimes where it's just like, look, I want what's best for people. And you mentioned it as well. I think the big thing too, like, and I started doing like content on the internet when I was like 12, 13 years old, is just whether it's 2 people or 2 million, like, you got an audience, have fun with that audience. Like, it's ultimately what we do, Johnny, and I'm sure you'll agree with the sentiment. It's very fun. We get to talk about kids games. Like, it's like, I love sports. I love the competitive nature of sports, but I'm also aware of the fact that, like, it's not life or death. Like, have fun with it, and exaggerate things if you have to, but enjoy it. And I think that the best part of this is just making sure that I don't lose sight. And I'm sure you feel the same way. One more, and it's another one that's, I'm sure, going to get you caught up in deep thought. But been a decade here for you here. Actually, now over a decade technically, because we're about to turn the calendar to 26. And yeah, time definitely flies. You've seen a lot of different regimes, a lot of different things come and go. I think technically when you started here, they were still at the Palace, and so now that you've
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
Joe Lewis for the Wings, so we've been around the block here. But you get to Detroit in 2015. Let's say that there's a alternate universe 2025 Johnny Kane gets into a DeLorean and can go back in time and tell 2015 Johnny Kane one thing. What's the one thing he's
Mm.
telling?
Whew. Oh man, that's good, dude. That's really good. Well, I don't want to get too deep, but
It's okay.
no, it is like, I'd say this. I think as we all go through it, life. So whether you're professional, personal, whatever, life, it gets hard. It gets hard at times, and there you will have perspective will be placed upon you, uh, if you seek it, and even when things aren't going great. The one thing I guess I would say, because even when, in 2015, I was old enough to know better, but I did get caught up in, I think, wanting to be universally liked.
Yeah.
Uh, and like I said, even if I told you, it's like when you ever ask an athlete, they'll always tell you like the three losses they had that year when they won 97 other
Hmm.
games. And you're like, why do those always stand out? It's just human nature.
Yeah.
So if you had, let's say, say you have 50,000 followers, if 49,500 of them were like, Chris, man, love the content, love it, love
Yeah.
it, love it. And then there's a couple of knuckleheads out there that are like, you don't know what you're doing. And it's like sometimes that sits with you. And it's like, gee whiz, I can't get through this guy. So I think for me was like maybe earlier on, I was more about, I wanted so badly to just be like, hey, I think I know what I'm doing, and please, don't be so critical.
Yeah.
And then as you go along, it's like, just know your stuff. You'll never be universally liked in anything, whether it's politics or sports or as a commentator or anything. You just have to go about it the right way, be as authentic as you can, operate in a way that is just you. And even for a lot of my friends that have been in the industry, for most of my friends, and this hurts me, but it's like most of my friends are now no longer working in the industry
Yeah.
because you reach a point where either financially it doesn't make sense, the schedule is crazy. You have to sacrifice a ton as far as like relationships, pets, children, all those things, normal things that other people get to experience. Um, but sometimes you're just maybe don't have what it takes to get like to the next rung. And so some people are like, I'd rather do something else that fills my life. So I've been fortunate that I've been able to kind of grind out what I consider as my dream. It's a dream city for me. And so I would just say, yeah, stay the course and don't, when life gets really hard and whether you're going through personal things, which we all do and will continue to, it's like you can't fold up the tent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, because once you get on the other side of it and then you have that point of reflection, it's like, man, how did I get through that? And then once
Yeah.
you do, it's like, golly, you know what I mean? It just makes you so much
For
more
sure.
complete as a person.
Yeah, and I think like again, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I know when things at least professionally really started to go right for me, I had this like crippling fear of self-destruction. And the thing is
Mm.
when you have the fear of self-destruction, it becomes very self-fulfilling. Like you're going to have it. And now, the idea of like having a thick skin, I knock on wood here, I think my worst days on the internet have already happened. So it's like I take comfort in the fact that like every day you get a little bit further and further removed from stuff that you kind of want to get away from. And I think that once you kind of hit that wall, that proverbial wall to an extent, it becomes a lot easier to create stuff. And ultimately, and you know this probably better than anybody, but like in person, people are awesome. Once you get out of
Mhm.
that echo chamber, like I'm yet to, again, knock on wood, I'm yet to have a bad fan experience. Everyone's awesome and cool and friendly and wants what's best for people like us. It's like, and that's such a humbling thing. So it's like that idea of staying the course and kind of getting out, because no, you have the benefit of like you're out with the team and you get to see the fans. Sometimes if I got to stare at four walls after another blown save, it gets a little bit. It can be a little bit frustrating over a 162 game campaign. But that's why I like getting to the park, and that's why I like the success that they've seen in the last 2 years. Look, man, this
But
was there. Go ahead, man.
I was just gonna say, but that's real life. When you said like your fan experiences, that's real life.
100%.
So it's like the human contact. I know you and I are talking on a screen right now, but it's pretty authentic.
Mhm.
But it's like that's real. So that's like we have, with the evolution of social media and all this other stuff, we've allowed that to be, well, that's part of normal life, but really isn't. Like the real interpersonal connections, like people, teams, in person, like that's life. So somehow we've introduced all this stuff. Like I remember the days before Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, all that. And it was like, well, how was life valued on that level? Man, maybe people talk behind your back, but kind of ignorance is bliss on that
Yeah.
because you never knew. Now it's like if somebody has something to say, they fire it to you, and that can kind of detract from your overall happiness. But to your point, like that's what we should just be focused on, is like that's the real stuff. All this other stuff, these the criticisms that come from God knows where, it's like, well, whatever. I guess that's part of it, but no sense in dwelling.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, this was I really appreciate you taking the time, man. This was a lot of fun. You've always been in my corner, which I greatly appreciate as well. And we'll have you on again at some point, maybe in the summer when the Pistons are in the NBA Finals, if you
Sure.
if you can if you can if you can pull it at that point. But thanks as
Let's
always,
do
man. You've always been a good egg, and we'll make sure to link to all your stuff and make sure that we continue to support you as well.
All right, you're the best, man. I appreciate it. I'll do it anytime.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Johnny. That had been a long time coming. I'm stunned that we hadn't had him on before. I've always had a very good relationship with Johnny, and like I run into him at the park. I know the job that he does. Maybe it's just because he's so busy. I do. This is where like I appreciate Austin being involved in getting guests sometimes. Maybe it's just my own social anxiety getting in the way. Though Johnny's been nothing but nice to me, and obviously, look, you're going to see him on television pretty much every night. But continue to support him and what the people at FanDuel do as well. They do a wonderful job. Johnny has become a Detroit staple for sure, and we appreciate him being on the program. So that will do it for this episode. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. We're on TikTok as well. Just crossed 12,000 followers on there. You guys know the drill. Post-game videos, random editorials. Yeah, I think the TikTok's kind of the way to go right now, at least in the modern age. If you're watching on YouTube, you can hit that like button. hit that subscribe button. That way we can get those watch hours up. You can find us in audio form on Apple Podcasts. You can find us in audio form on Spotify. And, of course, CastellaniContent.com is being updated every single day with the content that Austin and I create, whether it's Michigan basketball post games, football, Tigers stuff. I'll say this, episodes, Chris and Company episodes, it's all there. It's all neatly organized for you in a nice, beautiful archive. So really looking forward to people continuing to go there and support what we do. I think we got 3 more episodes of Chris and Company before we take our little hiatus for the holidays. And then after that, we will come back fresh and rejuvenated. But for the time being, we absolutely appreciate all of your continued support, and of course, I appreciate Austin, who just does a marvelous job as the artist behind the lens, so to speak. So we'll give you updates here pretty soon. But for the time being, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you again for Johnny Kane for being on this program. Have a great rest of your week. Peace and happiness.